My name is Eleanor Graves. I'm 82 years old. Most people just see the gray hair and the shaking hands, but they don't see the years I've lived, or the burden I've carried. I wasn't always this quiet. Once, my voice filled rooms, singing lullabies, offering advice, standing firm in storms. But somewhere along the way, I stopped speaking my truth. Not because I forgot it, but because no one wanted to hear it. You see, they think they know what happened. They think I did something unforgivable. But they were wrong. And I stayed silent, for their sake, not mine. All these years, I watched them judge me, turn away, and call me things I never imagined I'd be accused of. But now, before I leave this world, I need to set things right. Because the truth, the real truth, has waited long enough. There was a time when this house was full of life. I was not just mother or grandmother, I was the heart of this family. They came to me for everything. Birthdays were never complete without my apple pie. No decision was made without first asking, "What does Mama Eleanor think?" I raised 3 children, buried one, and still kept everyone standing when the world felt like it was falling apart. They used to say I had the wisdom of my mother and the strength of my father, both gone now, God rest their souls. I remember Sunday dinners, long tables, noisy laughter, the clinking of glasses. I'd sit at the head, smiling quietly, knowing I had built all this with my own 2 hands and a heart that never stopped giving. I was proud, respected, loved. Or so I thought. When my son, Jonathan, brought home Celeste, I welcomed her with open arms. She was gentle, graceful, and had that kind of beauty that made you stop and smile. I remember thinking, he's chosen well. I gave her my mother's sapphire earrings on their wedding day, something I had never planned to part with. That's how much I wanted her to feel like family. I never tried to control their life. I stayed in my lane, offered help when it was asked, and kept silent when it wasn't. I only ever wanted their happiness. And for a time, we had that. Sunday lunches, baby showers, birthdays, I was there for every moment, every celebration. Celeste even called me mom sometimes. It warmed my old heart more than I can say. But things changed. Slowly, quietly. It started with hushed conversations behind doors, glances I wasn't meant to notice. Then came the distance, less phone calls, fewer visits, awkward silences at the dinner table. Jonathan stopped asking for my advice. Celeste stopped meeting my eyes. And I didn't know what I'd done. Until one morning, everything fell apart. And I was no longer the mother, or the mother-in-law. I was the accused. You see, families aren't built on blood alone. They're held together by trust, by patience, by the little sacrifices we make for each other without expecting anything in return. That's what I always believed. That's what I taught my children, what my parents taught me. But somewhere along the way, those values faded. The roots I planted with love and care were trampled under greed, pride, and suspicion. After my husband passed, there was talk of dividing the property, selling off the land, moving on. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to sell the house that held decades of memories. And I certainly didn't want to see them fighting over what he and I built together from nothing. I tried to keep us together. I begged them to stay united. Family is not about what we get, I said, it's about what we give. But no one was listening anymore. Jonathan had changed. And Celeste, she had grown cold. Like a stranger living behind familiar eyes. Then, one night, she was gone. Celeste. Found lifeless in the old greenhouse behind the estate. A tragic accident, they said at first. But by morning, the whispers began. And by evening, they all turned to me. Why? Because I refused to hand over the will. Because I stood in the way. Because I still believed in protecting what was sacred. People always talk about the importance of leaving something behind for your children. A house, land, a name. But no one tells you how dangerous those things can become when love no longer holds them together. After my husband Henry passed, I was alone with more responsibility than I could bear. The property, the estate, it wasn't just walls and soil. It was our life's work. We had planted every tree here, laid down every brick, sacrificed decades to make this place a home, not just for us, but for generations. I didn't want it divided or sold off like some lifeless asset. I wanted it to stay whole, for birthdays and weddings, for family dinners, for memories not yet made. So, I followed the lawyer's advice and transferred it to my name. It was practical, secure. I never imagined it would be seen as suspicious. But grief has a strange way of distorting people's hearts. Especially when money is involved. Celeste and I had grown distant, that much is true. After her second miscarriage, something in her changed. She stopped coming to the garden with me, stopped helping with the kitchen on Sundays. She became quiet, walled off. I gave her space, thinking I was being kind. I never realized she mistook it for judgment. I never realized she thought I blamed her, Then came the day, so vivid, I still wake up hearing the police knocking at the door. Celeste was found in the old greenhouse, where Henry used to grow tomatoes and I kept my herb jars. The glass door was broken. Her head had struck a shelf. The fall had killed her instantly, they said. It was tragic. Unbelievable. And then, as they dug deeper, questions began to swirl. Why was she there alone? Why did I have the only key to the greenhouse? Why was the property in my name and not Jonathan's anymore? I could feel the doubt before they said a word. My son couldn't look me in the eye. My grandchildren stopped calling. One by one, their voices turned colder, their visits rarer. I was no longer Mom or Grandma. I was the woman they whispered about behind closed doors. The woman who took everything, and might have taken even more. The irony was cruel. I gave my life to this family. I let my dreams die so theirs could be born. And in the end, they chose to believe I was a murderer, rather than a mother who had only ever wanted to protect them. All because I tried to preserve what little we had left. Not for me, but for them. Family should be a place of shelter, not suspicion. Of forgiveness, not fear. We used to sit around one table, united. Now they sit in separate homes, guarding their share of what once was whole. They forgot the values we built this family on: love, unity, truth. I haven't. I never will. But time is running out. My hands are weak. My voice trembles. Still, I carry one last truth within me, one they refuse to see. I did not kill Celeste. But I know who did. That morning felt strange. Still. The kind of stillness that settles on your chest like a weight you can't name. The sky was overcast, and a soft drizzle clung to the windows. I remember looking out into the garden, watching the wind stir the rose bushes Henry had planted years ago. Something in my chest ached, but I brushed it off, just an old woman's nerves. Celeste hadn't come down for breakfast, but that wasn't unusual anymore. She'd been distant for weeks, quiet, distracted. I had made her tea the night before, left it by her door. I told myself she probably just needed rest. I should have knocked again. I should have checked. It was around 10 a.m. when Jonathan came bursting in, frantic. His voice echoed through the halls, panicked, sharp, like a wounded animal. "Where's Celeste? Has anyone seen Celeste?" Then one of the groundskeepers ran in, face pale as snow, stammering something about the greenhouse. I followed them outside, not knowing what to expect. I thought maybe she fainted. Maybe she'd fallen ill. But when I stepped into that glass house, everything changed. She was lying there, on the stone floor, motionless. Her arm twisted unnaturally. Her eyes open, but distant. The glass shelf above her shattered, pots spilled everywhere. One of her slippers was across the room. The other was still on her foot. The rain had started to drip through the broken panes, landing softly on her hair. I can still hear it. That drip, drip, drip like time itself had slowed. I couldn't move. Jonathan screamed. He dropped to his knees, cradling her head, sobbing. Her name. I tried to speak, tried to touch her hand, but someone pulled me back. They told me not to touch anything. The ambulance arrived. Then the police. Then the questions. So many questions. Too many, too fast. My head spun. Did I know why she'd gone there? Did she seem upset the night before? Did I have keys? When was the last time I saw her? The greenhouse hadn't been used in months. Why was she even in there? I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. And then, the whispers began. At first, it was just glances. A detective lingering too long when I spoke. A neighbor muttering, "She did put the property in her name, didn't she?" I wanted to scream. To tell them to look closer. To see the cracks they were ignoring. But I stood still. Frozen by grief and disbelief. Because in one breath, I had lost a daughter-in-law. And in the next, I was being treated like a suspect. They called it an accident at first. A tragic fall, they said. Slipped on the wet floor, hit her head on the corner of the shelf. Just bad luck. But I knew better. Celeste was many things: quiet, withdrawn, even cold at times, but careless? Never. She hated that greenhouse. Said it smelled like damp earth and forgotten things. She hadn't set foot in there in nearly a year. So why was she there that morning? And why was the door unlocked? Why was the key, my key, missing from the drawer that night? The police found it later. Slipped behind the kitchen cupboard, as if someone had tossed it there in a hurry. They said maybe I dropped it. But I never kept that key in my apron. I hadn't been to the greenhouse in weeks. And then there was her phone, missing entirely. Not in the greenhouse. Not in her room. We never found it. Her purse was untouched, her jewelry still on. No signs of a struggle. No fingerprints other than hers and mine. And yet, the position of her body, it didn't make sense. She had a bruise on her wrist. A fresh one. Dark, almost like someone had grabbed her hard. The coroner noted it, but brushed it off. Could have been from earlier, they said. Could have. Should have. Might have. That's all anyone said. Except me. I knew. I saw it in her eyes, those wide, terrified eyes. Frozen in time. Celeste didn't fall. She was pushed. Or worse, lured there by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who wanted her gone. Someone who knew how to make it look like it was my fault. And the worst part? I have a terrible suspicion. About who that someone might be. The police came back the next day. Not to offer comfort, but to dig. They searched the greenhouse again, this time with tape and cameras. Took boxes of papers from my study, old wills, letters, even my recipe books as if I'd hidden some sinister message in the margins. They took my clothes from that day, my shoes. One officer even asked if I had ever argued with Celeste. I told the truth, no more than any other family might. But the way they looked at me, like they were waiting for me to slip, to confess something I hadn't done, it chilled me. Jonathan, he couldn't even look at me. He sat on the porch, hollow-eyed, arms crossed, saying nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just watched. Like a stranger. That's when I knew the doubt had already taken root in his heart. By the end of the week, the neighbors had heard everything. This town talks fast when tragedy strikes. People I'd shared tea with, women I'd held during their own grief, they all looked at me differently. At the grocery store, Mrs. Langley didn't say hello. At church, no one sat next to me. Even the pastor gave a sermon about the sins we hide behind smiles. I knew it was about me. They didn't need proof. Just a whisper. Just a reason. To think that maybe the old woman in the big house had finally snapped. That I couldn't bear to give up control. That I wanted the land, the house, the name, for myself. What they didn't know was that I would have given it all up in a heartbeat to have one more peaceful dinner with my family. To see Celeste alive. To see Jonathan happy again. But no one asked me what I saw. No one cared that her phone was missing. Or that the door was wide open though the latch stuck in the rain. Or that the bruise on her wrist looked like fingers. They just nodded. Politely, and moved farther away. And so, while the police filed their papers and the community turned its back, I began my own quiet search. Because if no one else would find the truth, I would. Even if it broke my heart. The change didn't happen all at once. It came slowly, like a draft through a closed window. Barely noticeable at first, until one day, the whole house felt cold. It started with the small things. Jonathan stopped coming in through the kitchen door like he used to. He'd knock now, formally, like a visitor. He used to hug me tightly, sometimes lifting me off my feet just to make me laugh. But now, his arms would hover, then fall to his sides. No more warmth. Just awkward silence. Emma, my youngest, used to call every evening, just to tell me what the grandchildren had done, to ask about my day, to share recipes. But those calls became brief, routine. Then they stopped altogether. When I phoned her, she was busy. Or, just stepping out. Always polite. But never present. Even Daniel, my quiet middle child, who never asked for much, began avoiding eye contact. When we were alone, he seemed restless. Distracted. As if he was trying to decide whether to ask me something? Or accuse me of something. They didn't confront me. That's what hurt the most. They didn't sit down and say, "Mom, what happened?" or "We need to talk." No, they pulled away quietly, each one creating distance between themselves. And me, like walls being built in silence. I would enter a room, and they would fall silent. I caught them exchanging glances when I spoke, heard whispers behind half-closed doors. The laughter stopped when I walked in. And sometimes, I'd find them already gathered, talking low, serious, then pausing the moment they saw me. It was as if I had become other. Not their mother, not their compass. Just a question mark they didn't want to face. And the worst part? I kept smiling through it. Pouring tea, setting the table, asking about the children's school as if nothing had changed, because I didn't know how to say, "Please don't stop loving me." I raised them to stay close. To hold each other up. To believe in the strength of family. But when the storm came, they didn't shield me. They stepped away. One by one. I think I knew before I admitted it. But the heart, it can be stubborn when it wants to protect itself. It was a rainy afternoon. The kind Henry would have loved, gray skies, soft thunder, the kind of weather that made the walls hum with old memories. I had baked Jonathan's favorite, lemon poppy seed cake. The children were all visiting that day. Not for joy, not for celebration. But to talk. That word hung in the air like a blade. They sat in the living room. Jonathan on the edge of his chair, Emma gripping a tissue that she hadn't even used yet, and Daniel, pacing near the fireplace, silent. I stood in the doorway, watching them, cake still in my hands, cooling on a silver tray no one asked for. I tried to ease the tension. I added extra zest this time, I said, with a smile that even I didn't believe. No one responded. Jonathan cleared his throat. Mom, he said, not meeting my eyes, we just want to understand what happened, with the will. With the greenhouse. With Celeste. I froze. Not because of the question, but because of the way he said Mom. As if I were a stranger trying to wear that word like borrowed clothing. Emma looked down. Daniel stopped pacing. My hands began to shake. I placed the tray on the table and sat slowly. You think I had something to do with it, I said. Not a question. A fact. I watched their faces carefully. No one said yes. But no one said no. And that silence was louder than any scream. A few seconds passed. Maybe years. I don't remember. But I do remember my heart breaking, not all at once, but piece by piece. Because it wasn't the police who hurt me. Or the town. Or even the rumors. It was them. My own children. The ones I held against my chest. The ones I sang to in the dark when they were afraid. The ones who cried when I kissed their scraped knees. They looked at me now like I was a stranger, or worse. A threat. I stood up quietly and walked to the kitchen. I didn't cry. Not then. I just cut 3 slices of cake, placed them on plates, and set them on the counter. Like any mother would. Like nothing had changed. Even though everything had. It started with a drawer that wouldn't close. I was in Henry's old study. It's where I go when my bones feel heavy, where the air still smells like cedar and old books, where the silence isn't so loud. I was putting away a stack of unpaid bills when I noticed it, the bottom drawer on the left side, slightly open. It shouldn't have been. I never leave things out of place. My husband was the same. Meticulous. Predictable. That drawer held nothing of interest, just some folders, envelopes, old receipts. But when I pulled it open, something was missing. The file with the revised property documents. The one I kept. Copies of, just in case. Gone. Panic rose slowly. I checked the cabinet, the shelves, even Henry's locked box, nothing. Then I remembered something. 2 weeks before Celeste died, I had caught Daniel in this very room. He said he was looking for an old photo album. I didn't think much of it at the time. Now, it chilled me. I began digging through every corner of the house. Not like a madwoman, no, I was quiet, patient, methodical. And eventually, tucked beneath the lining of a drawer in Emma's old bedroom, I found it. Not the original. A photocopy. Of the very documents I had signed. But they had been annotated. Marked. My name circled in red ink. A sticky note with someone's handwriting, she's the sole owner. If she dies, it passes to the estate. I stared at that note for a long time. Because what it meant was simple. If I died, they'd get everything. But if Celeste died, and I was still alive, they'd get nothing. Not until I was gone. Unless, of course, I was blamed. Pushed out. Isolated. Suddenly, her death made more sense. And the tension in the house, the sideways glances, the odd silence in the weeks leading up to it. They weren't just grief. They were guilt. And calculation. They didn't just lose trust in me, they wanted me out of the way. Maybe not all of them. Maybe not directly. But someone wanted the estate. And Celeste, she must have found out. And paid the price. I sat at the edge of my bed, that crumpled paper in my hand, and everything around me went still. The rain outside had stopped, but I didn't notice. The clock in the hallway ticked on, but I couldn't hear it. The house, the same house I had filled with lullabies, laughter, and prayers, suddenly felt foreign. Colder. Smaller. As if the walls had pulled back in shame. I looked down at the note again. She's the sole owner. If she dies, it passes. To the estate. And under it, in that sharp, familiar handwriting, Jonathan's. My son's. I didn't cry. Not at first. My heart was too stunned to remember how. How could the boy who once clung to my dress when he was scared, now see me as a burden to be removed? How could he sit at my table, eat from my hands, knowing this thought had passed through his mind? How could Emma, my gentle girl, let this happen without a word? And Daniel, my quiet one. Was his silence protection, or participation? I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly. Not like glass. Like parchment, old and dry. Finally splitting under the weight of years. My hands trembled. My breath came shallow. I tried to speak, to say something to no one, to fill the void, but my voice failed. It was like grief had stolen even the air from my lungs. I sat there for hours. No tears. Just silence. Not because I was strong. But because heartbreak that deep doesn't scream. It doesn't wail. It simply falls quiet. The truth wasn't just cruel. It was unbearable. They didn't believe me. And worse, they might have never planned to. Maybe from the moment Henry died, this house wasn't mine anymore. Maybe I had been living among strangers who wore the faces of my children. And now, I was alone. Not because they left, but because they had already turned away long ago. And I just hadn't wanted to see it. This house used to breathe with love. The floors creaked with the laughter of little feet. The curtains fluttered in the spring breeze while I baked cinnamon bread in the kitchen. Henry would hum while pruning the roses. Jonathan would chase Emma through the hallway, and Daniel would sit by the window with a book too big for his age. It was loud, messy, full. It was alive. And I was at the center of it all. Not as a ruler, but as a root. Quiet, steady, holding it all together. Every room held a piece of me, a soft blanket here, a framed school drawing there. Even the chipped mug in the cupboard felt like home. But now? Now the rooms echo. Not with laughter, but with absence. The hallway is silent. The photos are dusty. The kettle whistles too loudly because no one's there to speak over it. The chairs sit untouched, too many of them. The dining table, once crowded, now looks like it was made for strangers. The warmth is gone. Not because the fireplace doesn't work, but because the people it burned for have stopped coming back. They still visit. Occasionally. Out of duty. They sit stiffly on the edge of the same couch they used to curl up on. They speak in polite tones, careful not to stay too long. They avoid eye contact. They talk about weather. Groceries. Nothing real. And when they leave, they always say, "Take care, Mom," but it feels like, goodbye. Not one of them stays to turn off the lights. I walk this house like a guest now, unwelcome in my own memories. Sometimes, I find myself standing in a room, staring at nothing, trying to remember what it felt like when it was mine. When it was theirs. When we were still a family. But that home is gone. In its place stands a house. Cold. Quiet. Too big for one broken heart. It happened at the town memorial. They had held a service for Celeste, 3 months after her death. A quiet gathering in the local church. A few words, some music, and a table with her photograph, surrounded by white lilies. I hadn't planned to speak. I wasn't even sure I should go. But something inside me, perhaps duty, perhaps guilt, told me I needed to. For her. For Jonathan. For the family that was slowly slipping from my hands like sand. I wore a simple black coat. The one Henry gave me on our 40th anniversary. I sat alone in the back pew while my children sat in the front. They didn't turn around. Didn't save me a seat. It was as if I were some distant guest. Or a ghost. When the pastor asked if anyone wanted to say a few words, I stood. My knees shook. My hands trembled. But I stood. I walked slowly to the front, eyes lowered, heart pounding like a drum in a war I never chose to fight. I spoke softly. Celeste was my daughter, too. Maybe not by blood. But in this house, in my heart, she was family. And though we had our differences, I would have given anything for her peace. I would have given anything for her to be here still. I looked up, and saw it. Jonathan staring at me, coldly. Emma, wiping a tear but refusing to meet my eyes. Daniel, stone-faced. The rest of the room? Silent. Watching. Whispering. Judging. Then came the voice, from the middle rows. A woman, a neighbor, I think. "It's a bit rich, don't you think? Saying that now, after everything?" There was a murmur. A few gasps. A few heads nodding. I turned back to my children, searching for someone, anyone, to speak for me. To defend me. To say, "That's enough." But they said nothing. Not one word. They let me stand there. Alone. In front of the entire town. Branded. Judged. Humiliated. I could feel the eyes crawling over me, accusing, curious, pitiful. My cheeks burned, but not from shame. From betrayal. Because I hadn't just lost Celeste. That day. I lost the people I had raised. The ones I had fed, bathed, carried, prayed for. The ones who once called me mom like it meant something. I stepped down from the podium, slowly. My legs heavy. My breath shallow. I made my way to the back, slipped out the door, and walked home alone. No one followed. No one asked if I was all right. And in that moment, I realized, they hadn't just doubted me. They had already decided I was guilty. Guilty of something I did not do. And that kind of abandonment? It doesn't scream. It carves a silence so deep it echoes. There's a kind of guilt that comes from doing wrong. And then, there's the kind you carry when you're blamed for something you didn't do. I live with the second kind. Not because I believe I'm guilty. I know I'm not. But because when the people you love most treat you like you are, something inside you begins to wither. You begin to question things. Memories. Words. Even your worth. There are days I sit in the garden and ask myself, did I say something cruel without knowing? Did I fail her somehow? Was I too proud? Too blind? But no answer ever comes. Just the wind brushing past the hedges Henry once trimmed with such care. Just silence. The world has already moved on. People nod at me in town, but they don't stop to talk. My name, once whispered with respect, is now spoken with doubt, if spoken at all. The church that once asked me to read scripture on Sundays now forgets to include my name in the bulletin. Even the postman leaves my mail on the step instead of in my hand. But the worst part? My children live their lives like I never existed. Jonathan never returned my calls. Emma sent a birthday card, unsigned. Daniel dropped off groceries 2 weeks ago but never came inside. I heard his car engine idle for a moment before he pulled away. He didn't even ring the bell. And so, I sit alone. In the house I built. With hands that once held them all, and now hold nothing. I didn't kill Celeste. But I live like I did. I eat meals in silence. I sleep in a room too big for one heart. I dust picture frames of a family that no longer wants to be remembered. And I wonder, if I had fought louder, would they have believed me? If I had screamed when they whispered, would it have mattered? If I had cried at the altar instead of holding my head high, would they have seen how broken I truly was? But guilt doesn't leave room for answers. It only stays uninvited, unjust, heavy. And I carry it, every day, not because I deserve it, but because no one else will. At some point, I just stopped explaining. What else was there to say? I had repeated the same truths so many times, they no longer sounded like words, just echoes in an empty room. They didn't believe me. Not the town. Not the police. Not my own children. So I stopped trying. I stopped correcting the rumors. Stopped telling the neighbors that I'd never touched Celeste. That I'd loved her like a daughter, even when she pulled away. That I'd only signed the papers to protect the estate, not steal it. I stopped answering the phone when it rang. Stopped opening the door unless I absolutely had to. Stopped going to church, or the market, or anywhere someone might pretend not to recognize me while still watching me from the corner of their eye. I let the flowers in the garden wilt. I let dust settle on the piano. I let silence move in, room by room, until the house didn't echo anymore, because there was no sound left to carry. It wasn't sadness. It was surrender. Not because I had given up on the truth, but because I knew no one else wanted to hear it. Even my children, when they visited, which became rare, came with caution. The kind of careful kindness people use with someone they no longer trust, but are too ashamed to admit they've already condemned. And when they left, I didn't walk them to the door anymore. I just nodded, as if to say, I understand. Because I did. I understood that in their eyes, I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a question mark they didn't want the answer to. And so, I shrank. From the world. From the family I gave everything to. From the woman I used to be. I started speaking less. I avoided mirrors. I forgot birthdays. I stopped defending myself, not because I couldn't, but because no one ever asked me to. And in that silence, I became something else entirely. Not a villain. Not a victim. Just forgotten. It's a strange thing, surviving without being truly alive. The years went by slow and shapeless. People stopped whispering eventually, but not because they believed in my innocence. They just forgot the story. Moved on to new scandals. New names. But mine remained, faded into the background like old wallpaper. Still there. Still stained. I became invisible. Not in some dramatic way. I still existed, technically. I watered the garden. Fed the birds. Paid the bills. Smiled at the postman. Replied, I'm fine, to anyone who asked, though no one really did. But inside? Inside, I was standing in the middle of a burnt-down house, pretending I could still host dinner in it. The grief never left. It just changed shape. At first, it was sharp. A daily sting. Waking up and remembering that Celeste was gone. That I was blamed. That the family I built no longer had room for me in it. But over time, it turned into something heavier. Not pain, but numbness. I stopped attending the neighborhood gatherings. I wasn't invited, but even if I had been, what would I say? I stopped baking. My recipes sat in a tin box like relics of a happier time. I stopped playing the piano. Henry's favorite songs, silent now for years. No one asked me why. And I never offered an answer. Because when you live long enough with a lie pressed against your skin, people stop seeing it as a wound. They start seeing it as part of you. And yet, somehow, I kept going. Not out of strength. Not out of hope. But out of something quieter. Stubbornness, maybe. Or the soft belief that one day, just once, someone might knock on the door not to pity me. Not to judge me, but to say, tell me your side of the story. No one ever did. But I woke up anyway. I lived through every awkward glance. Every birthday alone. Every time one of my children sent a card without a return address. Because surviving, I learned, isn't always a sign of victory. Sometimes, it's just what happens when grief doesn't kill you. When silence doesn't swallow you. When the truth keeps breathing, even when no one listens. I still talk to Henry sometimes. Not out loud. Not in madness. But in the kind of silence that only the soul understands. I sit by his rose bush, where the petals fall more than they bloom now, and I whisper with my eyes closed. Did we fail, Henry? Did we raise them wrong? Or did the world simply teach them how to forget us faster than we taught them to hold on? He never answers. But I imagine, if he could, he'd take my hand like he used to, rough from years of work, but warm, and remind me that love isn't always returned the way it's given. I used to believe family was sacred. That it meant protection. Loyalty. Roots that held you steady, even in the strongest storm. But lately, I wonder if I believed in something that was never real. Because love, I've learned, can be conditional. And the deepest cuts don't come from strangers, they come from the people who once begged you not to let go of their hand. I gave them everything. My time. My youth. My inheritance. And when the first storm came, when I needed them to believe in me the way I had believed in them, they let go. One by one. Without looking back. I used to wonder, why me? Why would my own children turn their backs? Why would no one fight for my name? For my truth? But now, I ask a different question. If they had stayed, but doubted me, would that have been worse? Maybe their absence is kinder than their suspicion. Maybe. And yet, through it all, I still rise in the morning. I still make tea. I still open the curtains and let the light in. Not because I've healed. But because some part of me refuses to disappear. There is strength, I've discovered, in standing, quiet and unseen, in a house built by love and broken by silence. There is strength in remembering. There is strength in still being here. And even though I no longer believe family means what I once thought it did, I believe in myself. In the woman who buried her husband, raised 3 children, survived betrayal, and still lights a candle every evening. Not for them. For herself. It was in the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. The air was thick with dust, memories, and the scent of time. I went looking for Henry's old military coat, a strange comfort I longed for in the middle of another sleepless night. What I found instead was a box labeled Emma, College. Inside, books, notes, old birthday cards. And at the very bottom, folded neatly inside a leather-bound journal, was a phone. Celeste's phone. My breath caught. My heart raced. For a moment, I thought I might faint. It was dead. But I took it downstairs, plugged it in, waited. When the screen finally flickered to life, it asked for a passcode. I stared at the numbers. And then, without thinking, I tried her anniversary, her wedding date to Jonathan. It worked. And what I saw changed everything. There were voicemails. Unopened. Dated the week before she died. One from Celeste to herself. A recording. Her voice shaking. If something happens to me, tell Eleanor. Please. She doesn't know. I thought I could fix it myself, but he knows. He found out about the change in the will. I think he's been in Henry's study. I think he's going to do something. Then silence. Then another, shorter message, Daniel. He said, if I said anything, he'd make it look like she did it. Like Eleanor. Did it. Oh God. I don't know what to do. Daniel. My son. My quiet one. My baby who never raised his voice. Who kept to himself. Who stood beside Jonathan at Celeste's memorial with dry eyes and a too steady jaw. I sat there for what felt like hours, holding the phone, unable to move. The betrayal, the grief, the rage, it all crashed over me in waves, too heavy to bear. But there it was. Proof. Not just that I was innocent. But that someone had known. And someone had hidden it. The attic. Emma's box. Her name on the label. Did she know? Did she help hide it? I didn't want to believe it. But the truth no longer cared what I wanted. I took the phone to the police the next day. They reopened the case. Quietly. Discreetly. A detective I hadn't seen before, young. Sharp-eyed, kind. He listened. He believed me. They brought Daniel in for questioning. He denied it at first. Of course he did. But the pressure built. The phone records. The journal entries. The handwriting on the sticky note matched his. Then came the slip. When asked how Celeste had fallen, he described the scene in too much detail. Details no one had ever released. Details only the killer would know. He broke. He confessed. Said it wasn't meant to happen that way. Said Celeste had threatened to go to the police, to tell Jonathan about the changes in the will. That she had discovered Daniel had forged Henry's signature months earlier, trying to redirect parts of the estate through offshore accounts. She told him she'd tell Eleanor. He said he just wanted to scare her. But fear, when shoved too hard, turns deadly. She ran. He followed. She slipped. She hit her head. And instead of calling for help, he staged it. He made it look like a fall. Left the door open. Planted the story. And then, watched his own mother suffer for it. Watched me break. In silence. I didn't tell them right away. Not after the confession. Not after the arrest. Not even after the newspapers quietly printed a retraction they thought no one would read. No, I waited. Waited for them to come. To look me in the eye. To say, we're sorry. But days passed. Then weeks. And not a word. So I called them. I told them I wanted to meet. Just one evening. Just the four of us, Jonathan, Emma, and what remained of Daniel. They came. Hesitantly. Jonathan looked tired, older. Emma couldn't stop fidgeting with her necklace. No one said a word about Daniel's arrest. No one asked why I had called them. So I told them. I told them everything. About the phone. The recording. The handwriting. The forged documents. The confession. And I watched as their faces changed. Jonathan turned pale. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came. He sank into the armchair like the air had been ripped from the room. Emma, her hand went to her mouth. Her eyes welled up instantly. She shook her head, again and again, whispering, no, no, but she wasn't denying what I'd said. She was denying what it meant. That she had suspected something. That she had helped hide the phone. That she let me suffer in silence, because the truth was too terrifying to face. I didn't know he'd hurt her, she said, barely a whisper. I just thought you'd, maybe pushed her, during an argument. Her voice broke. We thought you were angry. Controlling. You changed the will. I protected what your father built, I said softly. I protected all of you. Jonathan stood slowly. Walked to the window. His back to me. Then, I told people you were sick. That maybe you didn't even remember what you'd done. I thought it was the only way to keep things quiet. I wanted to hate him in that moment. I wanted to scream. But the truth is, I didn't have the strength to rage anymore. So I simply said, you didn't protect me. You buried me alive. The room went still. For a long time, no one spoke. Emma cried quietly. Jonathan still hadn't turned around. The wind outside brushed against the windows like a whisper from a world that had long moved on. And then, I stood. Not to comfort them, but to reclaim myself. You believed the worst of me. Without asking. Without proof. You watched me fade. You let the world spit on my name, and you offered me a tissue in silence. Emma sobbed. Jonathan turned, finally, his face twisted in shame. Mom, I didn't know what to believe. That's because you stopped knowing who I was, I said. Long before Celeste died. And with that, I walked away. Not out of anger. But because I no longer needed their permission to be whole again. I wanted to believe he was sick. Or desperate. Or tricked by someone else. But the truth is, harder than that. And quieter. Daniel didn't kill Celeste in a fit of rage. He didn't plan it like a cold-blooded villain. He did it because he hated what he believed I took from him. After the police showed me his confession, I asked to see the letters he wrote in holding, notes meant for the court, the therapist, maybe even for me. And in those pages, written in Daniel's rigid, cautious handwriting, I found the real answer. His words were not full of remorse. Not entirely. They were full of pain. You always saw Jonathan. You always heard Emma. But me? I was the one who was never enough. You never listened when I said I didn't want to be part of the family business. You told me to be patient. But I saw the way you lit up for them. And when you changed the will, when you cut out the division that was supposed to be mine, I knew it. I knew I was never your real choice. Celeste found the documents. She said she'd tell everyone. She said she'd go to Jonathan. And ruin me. So I stopped her. Not to kill her. Just to make her shut up. But she fell. And then it was too late. So I let them blame you. I let them believe what they already thought. Jealousy. Not of wealth. But of love. He didn't want the house. He wanted to be seen. He resented Jonathan for being the golden child, and Emma for being adored. He resented Celeste for having power in a family where he always felt small. And he resented me, for not noticing. But he was wrong. I noticed everything. I saw how he stood outside every family photo, just slightly out of frame. I saw how he clung to Henry's coat after the funeral and pretended he wasn't crying. I saw the notebook he hid under his mattress, filled with plans for a life he didn't think he could ever live. But I never said anything. I told myself he'd grow out of it. That he'd find his way. I didn't know his way would end in blood. And so, his motive was not greed. It was the slow corrosion of feeling unseen. The dangerous ache of thinking you are unloved. A lie he told himself for so long, he made it real. After Eleanor handed over Celeste's hidden phone and the handwritten notes found in the attic, the authorities reopened the investigation quietly. The evidence, especially the voicemail where Celeste explicitly warned that Daniel said he'd make it look like Eleanor did it, was damning. The police brought Daniel in for questioning. He denied everything at first, cold and composed. But under pressure, he faltered. He slipped, describing details of the night Celeste died that no one outside the crime scene could have known. Faced with mounting evidence and handwriting analysis that matched the forged estate documents, Daniel confessed. He claimed he hadn't meant to kill her, only to silence her long enough to take control of the inheritance he believed was stolen from him. The court didn't see it as an accident. With charges of manslaughter, fraud, and obstruction, Daniel was sentenced to 17 years in prison. The will was investigated next. Eleanor's version, drafted and signed with full legality, was restored. The property was formally returned to her name. And the town that had once whispered about her slowly began to whisper about Daniel instead. Newspapers ran quiet retractions. The church invited her back. A few neighbors left baskets of fruit at her doorstep, too afraid or ashamed to say anything in person. But Eleanor wasn't angry. She was hollow. Emotional aftermath, the legal truth brought her name back. But it couldn't bring her peace. When Eleanor told Jonathan and Emma about the confession, the proof, and the police case, the house fell into stunned silence. Jonathan collapsed onto the couch, face pale, murmuring, "All this time, we thought," Emma sobbed in the hallway. "I'm so sorry, Mom. You thought I was a murderer." Eleanor's voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It was calm. Because anger had already passed. What was left was clarity and distance. Emma begged for forgiveness. Jonathan tried to explain, they didn't want to believe it, but they couldn't understand the will, the property changes, Celeste's sudden death. Their doubt had grown and the silence Eleanor had mistaken for strength. "You left me to drown," Eleanor said, standing in the center of the very living room they once filled with laughter. "And now that the water has receded, you want to build a bridge. But I no longer need to cross it." They visited after that, less out of duty and more out of guilt. But Eleanor had changed. She made tea, smiled politely, asked about the grandchildren, but never let them back in the way they once were. She forgave. But she did not forget. In the months that followed, Eleanor didn't seek revenge. She didn't write letters to the newspapers or stand at Daniel's trial. She didn't fight for sympathy. Instead, she turned inward. She reopened the greenhouse Celeste had once loved. She planted herbs and roses. She invited orphan children from the local shelter to visit the gardens. Quietly, without fanfare. She started journaling again, this time for herself. She stopped waiting for the phone to ring. In her final entry, she wrote, "They took my silence for weakness. But it was the only thing keeping me whole. Now that the truth is out, I do not want to be restored to who I was. I want to be better. Quieter. Stronger. I am not the woman who was accused. I am the woman who survived it." And with that, Eleanor finally found peace. Not through her family. Not through justice. But in herself. "They cleared my name." The newspaper printed a quiet apology in the bottom corner of the third page. The police sent a formal letter. The town whispered less. Some even nodded when I walked past, as if that alone could erase what had been done. I was innocent. Officially. Legally. Publicly. But none of that brought back what I lost. It didn't bring back the sleepless nights I spent wondering if I was going mad. It didn't return the years I spent walking through my home like a ghost, whispering apologies into a silence that never answered. It didn't change the fact that my own children, my flesh, my soul, my purpose, believed I was capable of murder. They say justice brings peace. But they forget to say what it does to the heart when it comes too late. Jonathan sends flowers now. Emma calls on Sundays. They try. They try so hard. But every word they speak carries the weight of the words they didn't say when it mattered most. They never asked me if I was okay. They never said they believed in me. Not until the world told them they were wrong. And now, I smile. I nod. I answer their messages. But something inside me has gone quiet. Not out of anger. Out of grief. Because it wasn't just Celeste who died that year. It was the version of me who believed that love, real love, was unshakable. Now I know better. I walk through the garden alone. I sleep with the door locked. I keep my memories like photographs, touched gently, but never too long. And when people ask, "How are you?" I say, "I'm free." And I am. But freedom, I've learned, can still hurt. My name is mine again. But my heart is something I'll spend the rest of my life learning how to live with. They came to me one evening. Together. It was raining, lightly, like a memory trying not to fall apart. I had just finished watering the indoor plants when I heard the knock. Jonathan stood in front, his hands in his coat pockets. Emma was beside him, eyes already brimming. No rehearsed speeches. No flowers. Just guilt, plain and raw, etched into the lines of their faces. They stepped inside like strangers returning to a home they once knew. For a moment, we just stood there. Silence sat between us like another ghost in the room. Then Emma said it first. I was wrong. Her voice cracked. I was scared. And I chose the easiest person to blame. Jonathan followed, quieter. I didn't want to believe Daniel was capable of it. But even more than that, I didn't want to admit that we abandoned you. He looked down. We didn't just doubt you. We left you alone. And that's unforgivable. But we're still asking, Emma added, stepping forward, trembling. We're asking anyway. For your forgiveness. They both waited. I looked at them, at my children. The ones I carried, raised, defended, fed. The ones who once cried into my arms. The ones who let the world believe I was a monster. And I was quiet. Not because I hadn't dreamt of this moment. But because I never imagined how hollow it would feel when it finally came. You didn't believe me when it mattered. I said gently. You let me break in silence. Emma began to cry again. Jonathan closed his eyes. I stepped closer. But I'm still your mother. And mothers, we forgive. Even when our hearts are never quite the same. They broke. Jonathan reached for my hand. And held it like he did when he was a boy, sick with fever and fear. Emma clung to my shoulder and wept like the child she once was. We stood there for a long time, 3 people holding the shattered pieces of what they'd almost lost forever. And in that moment, the rain outside stopped. I forgave them. Not because they earned it. Not because their apologies erased the years of silence, suspicion, and humiliation. But because holding on to the bitterness would have only deepened the wound, mine, not theirs. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It isn't pretending nothing happened. It's choosing to lay the burden down, but keeping the scar as a reminder. I told them, I forgive you. And I meant it. I saw how the words softened their shoulders, how the relief rushed into their eyes. But I also told them something else. This house remembers. And so do I. Emma sends letters now, handwritten, careful, warm. Jonathan visits on Sundays. He brings groceries. Sometimes flowers. The same kind Henry used to bring after a long day. But it's not the same. And it never will be. The innocence is gone. The trust is cracked. The love is still there, but it limps now, instead of running freely. I welcome them. I smile. I listen to their stories. But I do not let them close. Because when you've been thrown into the fire by the hands that once held you, you learn to sit by the warmth. Without ever stepping in again. I tend my garden. I drink my tea. I write in my journal. And I live. Not in shadows. Not in fear. But in the quiet clarity that comes when truth survives. I am not angry. I am not bitter. But I will never forget. And in that space between pain and peace, I finally found myself. Some wounds stop bleeding, but they don't stop aching. That's what I've learned. You can survive the betrayal. You can clear your name. You can sit at the same table with the people who once doubted you, and even smile. But deep down, there are scars that no apology can reach. Scars that never fully heal. Not because you haven't forgiven, but because the pain etched itself into your memory, in the silence, in the glances that looked away, in the years you spent carrying a grief no one else wanted to hold. I walk through this house now, free of shame, but never untouched. And maybe that's the truth we rarely speak aloud, that some storms don't pass. We just learn to walk through the rain. So I carry my scars gently, like medals no one asked for. They remind me I survived. They remind me who I am. And though the ache will never fully leave me, neither will the strength I found in its shadow. People think grief tears families apart. But grief is only the flame. Assumptions are the spark. And in our case, they lit the match long before Celeste ever died. They didn't ask me what happened. They didn't come to hold my hand. They didn't search for truth. They assumed. Because it was easier. Because pain seeks a target. And love, when tangled in fear, can turn sharp without warning. They looked at the rewritten will, the silence in the house, the distance between me and Celeste, and they decided that I must have had a reason. Not to protect, but to harm. That was the cost of their assumption, a mother silenced. A heart shattered. A home emptied by doubt. And Daniel? He was my son. But greed makes people forget what love looks like. Makes them see inheritance instead of memories. Property instead of people. He wasn't born cruel. He was just never taught to believe that being loved was enough. So he stole. He lied. He let me burn because it meant he got to stay clean. And by the time the truth came out, there was no joy in being believed. Only ashes where trust used to live. Before you accuse, ask. And before you turn your back on those who raised you, make sure the truth isn't still whispering in the silence. We elders may move slowly, speak softly, but do not mistake age for weakness. Our hands may tremble, but they have carried the weight of generations. Our eyes may dim, but they've seen more than most hearts could bear. We don't always shout our truths. But that doesn't make them any less true. So when the world offers you a story, one dressed in rumor, painted with doubt, convenient in its cruelty, pause. Listen. Ask us. Because the worst wounds we suffer aren't from the passing of time, but from being cast aside by the very voices we once taught to speak. You don't know everything. But we remember everything. And all we ask, before it's too late, is this: don't make us carry the burden of your silence. And don't condemn us without hearing the truth that no one else dared to speak.